vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, a marathon council meeting leads to big budget changes and a somewhat smaller tax cut for homeowners. We talk about that and the fight over free speech in Florida with government expert Chris Hand. Then a popular outdoor record festival returns to St. Augustine. We talk to the vinyl vendor who started it all. And a Jacksonville-born jazz bassist rides the wave of a 5-star review from Downbeat magazine all the way back to the First Coast. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
I'm from NPR News in Washington. I'm Korva Coleman. Ukrainians say they're grateful President Trump seems to have changed his stance on Ukraine's status in the war. Trump said Ukraine could get back all territory taken by Russia, but Ukraine appears concerned Trump will leave peace efforts to Europe. NPR's Joanna Kakissis reports from Kyiv.
Strategic Studies professor Phillips O'Brien of St. Andrews University in Scotland said Trump's upbeat comments about Ukraine complicate Russian President Vladimir Putin's narrative about this war.
Putin has been saying we can't lose, we're too strong, we're going to win, Ukraine has to give up. It puts the Russians in a bit of a bind messaging-wise.
Ukrainian lawmaker Ivana Klimpush-Tyntsade says she hopes Trump's words will translate into actions like concrete security guarantees and more U.S. sanctions on Russia.
Well, Russia is definitely much weaker than Russia wants to pretend it is.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin says it will continue its war on Ukraine. Joanna Kakissis, NPR News, Kyiv.
The group, founded by the slain conservative activist Charlie Kirk, held an event last night at Virginia Tech. Officials with Turning Point USA are resuming the tour Kirk started when he was killed 2 weeks ago in Utah. Virginia Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin told the students in the crowd to keep speaking out as Kirk did.
The truth is that the question that has been asked over and over again is, who will be the next Charlie? And as I look out in this room and I see thousands of you, I want to repeat the best answer that I have heard. You will be the next Charlie. All of you.
The other main speaker for the Turning Point USA event was conservative media pundit Megyn Kelly. This week, President Trump and administration officials linked Tylenol use to autism. Researchers say there's no evidence that taking Tylenol while pregnant causes autism in children. Separately, Trump administration officials have relaxed restrictions on a drug called leucovorin. They're promising that it is a promising treatment for autism. Researchers argue such statements are premature. NPR's Yuki Noguchi has more.
Since the Trump administration said it would greenlight broader use of leucovorin, the Autism Science Foundation has fielded a lot of calls from patients and their families. Here's the group's chief scientific officer, Alicia Halliday.
We've also seen a lot of activity on social media where families are very, very excited that it's going to be easier for them to get.
Halliday is also the mother of an autistic daughter. She says there's still very little research on leucovorin, its safety or impact on autism. She's concerned the administration is offering false hope to many families. Yuki Noguchi, NPR News.
On Wall Street in pre-market trading, Dow futures are down more than 150 points. This is NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is now 9:04. A St. Augustine man who threatened to kill the president during a 17-second phone call in April has pleaded guilty to making that threat. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, 52-year-old Edward Meller called the FBI's Jacksonville office on April 1st and told someone in public affairs that he wanted to assassinate the president. Then he hung up. The Secret Service traced the call to Meller, who was arrested after the FBI's phone number was found in his cell phone call log. Meller entered his guilty plea this week. He could be sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and fined $250,000. The Jacksonville City Council has approved legislation designed to entice a TV or film production company to film here in the River City. The ordinance approved this week would transfer $400,000 to the Office of Economic Development from the city's debt management fund to use in negotiations with the yet-to-be-identified production company, that according to partners at the Jacksonville Daily Record. The Economic Development Office director had said earlier this month the production company would spend about $3 million here in Jacksonville over 6 months. The company would purchase 2,400 hotel rooms and employ about 100 local residents. Our summer-like weather pattern will continue here in Northeast Florida today, and we'll have a better chance for showers and storms later on this afternoon and into the evening hours.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Viking, committed to exploring the world in comfort, offering small ship experiences with a shore excursion included in every port and programs designed for cultural enrichment. Learn more at Viking.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. Today, what's the state of free speech in the free state of Florida? We discuss that and an epic budget battle with government expert Chris Hand. Later in the program, Jacksonville-born jazz bassist Jeremiah Hunt returns home for a local show following a 5-star review in Downbeat magazine. But first, we're joined as we are each month by attorney, author Chris Hand to help us make sense of government headlines. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Ann. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for being here. This was a epic city council meeting this week. 13 hours, start to finish, a little bit more. They ended up with a $2 billion budget. Both sides got something, both sides lost something. I'm just curious, in all your years, if you've seen a budget meeting quite like this one.
I think this definitely sort of set a new tone for budget meetings. There have certainly been budget meetings that have gone very late before. There have been budget meetings that have been contentious on issues. I'm not sure there have been many that have combined those two factors in the way that this one did. As you say, it went 13 hours. They finally wrapped up the budget just before 4 a.m. On Wednesday morning after starting Tuesday afternoon, and really very narrow votes on some key issues. Ultimately, the city council passed the new millage rate or property tax rate by a single vote, a 10-9 vote. It decided to strip some controversial amendments out of the budget that were on policy issues, also by a single 10-9 vote. And out of those narrow votes came a more consensus vote for the overall budget, a 15-2 final vote. But it was contentious on a number of issues, and not just the substance, but also the rhetoric. There was some very heated rhetoric back and forth between members of the council. Remember, this is probably the most important thing that the city council does each year is pass a budget. Their number one responsibilities, their top responsibilities under the charter are to pass a millage rate. That's something that they have complete say over. The mayor has no role other than proposing a millage rate. And the budget, where the mayor has some line item veto authority. But again, the charter places that in council's scope of authority under our charter. So this is the most important thing council does each year. They typically tend to take this process very seriously, spend months on it going forward. So I think we saw that reflected in this meeting, very strong feelings about different aspects of both the city's revenue and expenditure picture. You add that with kind of a more difficult political climate right now. Plus the prospect of working 13 hours straight on anything into the wee hours of the morning. And I think that's why we saw some of the tone that we saw at that meeting.
Yeah, some of it very personal. They really did seem to be sticking to their guns on both sides. It's surprising because the consequences of not passing a budget are really quite dire. I mean, that could affect city bond ratings. The state could take over city finances. And it seemed like it was almost a game of chicken until one of the city council members, Will Lanahan, basically said, he was willing to shift his vote on the DEI, abortion, and immigrant component, those amendments that were introduced by Rory Diamond. Ultimately, they decided not to impose those restrictions on the budget. Do you expect that issue is going to go away?
I don't think that issue is likely to go away because I think those amendments will probably continue coming up in some form or another. They'll try to attach them to different vehicles. I think one of the reasons Councilman Diamond was attempting to attach those amendments to the budget is that there would be a lower veto override standard. So essentially, when you pass legislation, you have to pass it by a supermajority, 13 council votes or more, in order to potentially override a mayoral veto. And we already saw that on one of these amendments earlier in the year. He had attached an amendment to something that would ban sort of funding for anything related to, undocumented immigrants, and the city spending funding on that. The mayor had vetoed it, and council did not have the 13 votes to override. So his strategy here was to put those in the budget, because when a mayor vetoes line items in a budget, council only needs a simple majority, 10 votes, to override that veto. So that was the strategy here. But no, I don't think we've heard the last of those amendments. I think that he will probably attempt to find other vehicles for those, and there'll be further discussion about them going forward. Obviously, they initially did pass. This was for people who like to follow legislative process, which is probably virtually nobody at this point, but for people who like to do that, it really was sort of a game of legislative twister, because in the sense of those amendments initially passed 10-9. So you think, well, that's a council majority. Now the budget will go ahead and pass 10-9 as well, right? No, because there are two members of the city council, Mike Gay and Terrence Freeman, who are associated with companies who have contracts or get money from the city. So a ruling was made that they had to recuse themselves from the final budget vote. That meant that 10-9 majority didn't exist for the final budget. There were only 8 votes for that.
So they could vote on the amendment, but they couldn't vote on the budget.
Couldn't vote on the budget, exactly. So as a result, there was not a majority for the budget. And as you said, there are very dire consequences. The city gets almost $250 million a year in shared state funding each year that could potentially go away if the budget were not passed in time. As you say, the state would actually have more authority at that point to do a fiscal takeover, which, kind of given what's happening with Florida DOJ and some of those efforts right now, is not just sort of a hypothetical situation. And as you say, the city's bond rating could be affected, which impacts and makes it much more expensive for the city to borrow money, which it's doing right now for a lot of infrastructure projects, including the renovation of the stadium. So there were dire consequences until, again, just before 4 a.m., Will Lanahan, who's the city council person representing District 3, who had voted for the amendments, he essentially said, look, our most important job as council members is to pass this budget. We need to get this done. So he changed his vote on the amendments. So the amendments would be taken out of the budget, and the budget itself would ultimately pass.
It's interesting when, you say that it is the most important thing that the council does. I think there were council members saying that themselves. So it is interesting that there are 2 council members that are prohibited from voting on the budget at all. But that vote you mentioned, Will Lanahan, said, he had a great line where he said, at some point you have to be pragmatic, and you start thinking real pragmatically at 3:30 in the morning. It was a late meeting. We're talking to Chris Hand. He is an attorney, author, and government expert about the latest headlines on the state and local level. If you've got questions or comments for Chris, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. We've got Mark from the South Side on the line. Good morning, Mark. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. I was just curious, and I haven't paid a lot of attention to it since it passed, but I don't know if the millage rate issue passed or failed. But my whole concern prior to this was the city council. It seems that the budget for the city, if I heard correctly, has grown significantly over the past 3 or 4 years. I mean, way past, inflation, all that stuff. It's grown. And we're worried about a $14 million property tax cut out of a $2 billion city budget. That's less than 0.7%. And so I look at that number and I think that's nothing. So if I'm on the right, pushing a tax cut, about all, to me, it seems more symbolism over substance. Yes, you passed the tax cut, but it isn't anything significant, in my opinion. And if you're on the left, I would say, yeah, let them have that tax cut. It isn't anything. You know, why would we even argue on it? But again, I don't even know if the thing passed or not. That was just my comment.
Thanks, Mark. And it did pass the millage rate reduction, an eighth of a mill. You know, there was pressure from the state CFO to have a much bigger cut, something that perhaps Mark would support. And we do know that, you know, we're going to get to the issue of property taxes and their future in Florida, you know, entirely. But, you know, property taxes have risen by more than 45% since 2019. That is a huge chunk of money that governments are getting, local governments are collecting. And so, I mean, I would guess inflation, you know, answers some of the why they would be spending that much more money. Is that the full answer?
I think that's part of the answer. So, Mark, to your question, as Ann just said, yes, the millage rate with the reduction did pass. So now our millage rate is 11.19, or that's essentially $11.19 per $1,000 of property value is the new millage rate. That's a cut of about 1/8 of a mil, about 1% of property taxes. I think the average homeowner, will see, just about $20 in savings over the next year. That'll also be about $13.5 million that had to be cut from the city budget. And there's no question that property tax collections have gone up as home values have increased in the state, which they have substantially. And of course, commercial property values, any property values, as they've gone up, that's had a big impact. I think what you've seen, and people who had argued against the millage decrease would say that the cost of many government services have also gone up considerably as well, whether that's the cost of salaries to kind of government employees have increased again with inflation and price rises. The cost to build things for government has gone up. And so even though property tax collections have been up, I think those who opposed the millage reduction would say that, that government costs have gone up as well. And property taxes, we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, we get into what Tallahassee's doing, but do tend to fund a lot of these core services like police, fire, parks, public works, in case of school boards, teacher salaries. So they do fund a lot of core services. But, Mark's position was the one that ultimately prevailed at City Council, where they did make this property tax reduction, $13.5 million. Council was able to restore, despite that reduction, some items that had been cut out of the budget. So money for affordable housing, money to finance the city's kind of annual dues to the Northeast Regional Council, which is our regional planning council here, money for some community health clinics. So I think what you really saw on Tuesday night was kind of a back and forth that ultimately ended in a balance. Folks who wanted to reduce the millage, who have some of the same concerns that Mark does, were successful in doing that by 1/8 of a mil. But some key city priorities that I think others were concerned might be threatened by that millage cut were put back into the budget. That's the kind of balance and back and forth you often see in budget negotiations, and you often see right there on budget night. This year was no different.
We've got a call from Tom on the west side. Good morning, Tom. Go ahead.
Yes. I got to say, the most interesting part of both of the budget discussions, and the second one was way less contentious than the first, was how the Diamond Amendment really fractured the Republican voting bloc. Also, the millage thing. Let me quickly add this. The overwhelming mood of the commentators during the night was, oh my gosh, we don't want this. So it's very disappointing that they went and passed this insignificant reduction for the average homeowner.
Thanks, Tom. I asked our Jacksonville Today City Hall reporter, Mike Mendenhall, about the split, because there was many dozen speaker cards, well over 50. I don't know the final count, but I was asking him how it sort of shook out. And he said it was about 60-40, he thought, in terms of people who were supporting a millage rate cut versus people who were supporting services and opposing some of those cuts. But certainly the Diamond Amendment was incredibly divisive. And at one point, Diamond really thought that he had won. I mean, he said, he criticized, quote, the tyranny of the minority who were going to refuse to accept that you lost the vote. He said, you lost. Lose the vote with some grace. Don't hold up the entire city budget. So I think he really thought that this was going to go his way.
Well, and as we've talked about, it ultimately did not because you have to, a budget is the whole of the sum of its parts, and you ultimately have to pass kind of an ultimate budget. So it was not successful. First of all, on the issue, I just want to compliment everybody who showed up, every citizen who showed up at City Council, regardless of what position they had, to make their position known to council members. The top of the organizational chart at the City of Jacksonville is the citizenry, and this is the citizens' budget. So to everybody who took time out of their schedules on Tuesday night or early Wednesday morning to be there and voice their opinions, kudos to you for using your effective citizenship powers to make your position known. The Diamond Amendments were very controversial. We heard this during some of the public comment, and I think they were controversial for a number of reasons. One is more substantive. There are people on different sides of this issue, and obviously there were citizens there and around the community who feel like who disagree with Councilman Diamond's positions on those issues. But there's a procedural issue as well that I think caused some controversy among the council members. For decades, it has been an article of faith among the council that budget should be statements of revenue and expenditures, that they should not include anything organizationally or operational or policy in a particular budget. This was a sharp contrast from that there are these three essentially policy statements in a budget. That's more common at the state and federal level where there's what's called proviso language, where, the legislature or Congress puts in language to kind of provide context to some of their spending decisions. But here at the local level, that's typically not the case. A budget records revenue in and directs expenditures out. So procedurally, I think this caused some consternation among council members as well, because again, it's been an article of faith for council for decades that is not the case. When I was at City Hall, particularly in our first budget, we had some things in there the council said, nope, we don't do reorganization or policy in a budget. We're taking those out in our process. And I think, again, both substantively and procedurally, that's why this was controversial. And I think, ultimately maybe one of the reasons this didn't pass.
All right, we've got a call from Mike in Riverside. Good morning, Mike. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks for walking us through this contentious meeting. I had to go to bed a little after 1 a.m. because I had work the next day. But I was curious, could you talk a little bit more about, with all of the debate over the line item amendments and restoring some of the funding? I know there was discussion around, was it going to come from, say, for the community health services, was it going to come from UF? No, it would come from fund balance. It would come from budget stabilization. With the millage cut, where is the money going to be coming from for the restoration of some of these programs?
Thanks, Mike. I mean, one thing that I can tell you is there is going to be a way more detailed look at that in Jacksonville today. I mentioned Mike Mendenhall was there for the entire meeting, and he is drilling down on that today. So there will be a greater understanding of that. And I don't know that I have that level of understanding myself.
There was some debate, and so they ended up pulling it from a variety of sources, whether that's budget stabilization or fund balance, which is another way of saying one of the city's reserves. They ended up, I think, and we'll see some of the more detail when Mike and others kind of unpack that. By the way, kudos to Mike Mendenhall from Jacksonville Today and other reporters, David Barreline from the Florida Times Union, A.G. Gankarski from Florida Politics, folks from all the TV stations who were there until the bitter end and covered every aspect of this. But right at the end, as they were doing some of those restorations for affordable housing, community health clinics, the Northeast Florida Regional Council, the council worked with the auditors to identify a variety of different funding sources, some of which, our caller just sort of named, avoided kind of cutting into things like UF Health and the amount that the city gives to UF Health Jacksonville. I suspect there's going to be a lot of truing up in the days to come. One of the things the council did with some funding was do what's called put it below the line. In other words, kind of delay it for kind of, stick it in the budget as a possibility, but delay the actual passage. One example of that is each year the city of Jacksonville has given money to Jack's Chamber. That was put below the line in this budget for future consideration. So my anticipation is that council and the council auditors are going to have to come back to a variety of these items just to ultimately true them up. That's very common in this process. And, council deals with budget issues every 2 weeks in their meetings, even if they are not passage of the big budget. So it's not uncommon to have to go back and make some tweaks and take some other action to make sure that everything is properly aligned.
All right. We're talking to Chris Hand about the latest state and government headlines, state and local headlines. You can give us a call at 904-549-2937 to join the conversation. I want to move on to some of the ongoing fallout, particularly on the free speech front when it comes to Charlie Kirk and, following the assassination of, this fairly disputatious podcaster and activist. A lot of people getting suspended, a lot of people losing their jobs or perhaps about to lose their jobs. I saw one report that said there's been around 100 people nationwide, including police officers, teachers, nurses that have been either suspended or fired. And we know that, even our own colleague here, A.G. Gankarski, was briefly suspended from his news outlet for a question that he asked of a congressman in the wake of in the immediate aftermath of the assassination. So a lot of people wondering about the chilling impact on freedom of speech.
Well, first of all, a horrible tragedy, and not just a tragedy, but a crime in the assassination of Mr. Kirk, and condolences to his wife and to his children and family on that killing. And as you say, Ann, it has kind of launched a national conversation, not just about Mr. Kirk and that horrible act, but also about some of the free speech implications of that. I thought it was very powerful at his funeral that Erica Kirk, his wife, in giving her kind of eulogy to him, talked about sort of that that she forgave the person who shot him, and that the way that he would want to deal with this situation and the way she planned to was not with hate and not with love. And so I think those were powerful sentiments that were said at his funeral. We have not necessarily seen those sentiments kind of translate to kind of other parts of the dialogue since then. I think as you say, there have been some suspensions of media figures, probably most prominently Jimmy Kimmel, who has a late night show on ABC. I think where the challenge gets in on free speech, of course, is when sort of government actors get involved. All right, the First Amendment protects freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and that doesn't mean people can't disagree, and that people aren't going to be held accountable, or there won't be consequences from things we say. I think there's a real distinction at times between understanding the difference between you can say something and there might be negative consequences for you in that, or you might be held accountable for it. But when we get into constitutional issues is when the government begins to regulate that speech and take punitive action related to that speech. And I think that's been one of the biggest concerns nationally and in the aftermath of this horrible act. For example, the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission appeared to threaten media affiliates that aired, Jimmy Kimmel's show after some remarks that he made, which he's clarified to say that in no way was he trying to make light of Mr. Kirk's death. But when the chairman of that commission, a commission that approves kind of media transactions and otherwise regulates kind of local affiliates around the country, when the chairman essentially, indicates that punitive action might be taken against stations that don't remove someone from the air because of a comment they've made, that's when you begin to get into these government regulation of speech issues. Similarly, there was a controversy involving a city commissioner from kind of South Florida who made some unfortunate and inappropriate comments online. And, of course, that person's constituents have the power to remove that person from office. But again, getting into the realm of government action, there then began to be calls from some to have the governor suspend or remove that person from office. So, again, people can disagree about comments and, things we say and do. We can be held accountable for those, and there can be consequences from them. But when you really begin to get into these deep First Amendment concerns is when government actors begin to indicate they are going to take action based on that. And I think that's been some of the concern about the aftermath of this horrible assassination, where government actors have weighed in.
So you mentioned the Palmetto Bay council member, Steve Cody, who had made, as you said, very, kind of tasteless remarks about Charlie Kirk and his murder. But the participation now of two congressmen who are urging the governor to have him removed from office. basically citing, and I'll quote the letter that they sent to Ron DeSantis, saying that, he's used previously his power, quote, to suspend local officials whose actions or behavior undermined the confidence Floridians have in their government, and saying that removal, in this case, such decisive action is necessary. Undermining the confidence Floridians have in their government. Is there anything in there that is a foothold for sidestepping or avoiding the freedoms afforded by the First Amendment?
Well, the governor has very broad suspension powers, as we've seen over the last couple of years, and that he's suspended state attorneys in both Hillsborough County and Orange County, and in some other circumstances as well. Um, that power is broad, but I think one would be hard pressed to interpret that power as the power to suspend someone sort of based on what they've said. I think it's important to remember that in our democracy, there's an ultimate suspension power that belongs to the electorate, to the voters. So if this particular city commissioner is going to be running for office again, he's going to be held accountable for these remarks, and voters will make the decision whether or not, these, as you say, very tasteless, unfortunate, inappropriate remarks should have a bearing on whether this person continues to stay in office or not. But if you interpret the governor's suspension power to include any situation where somebody says something, again, I think that's really going to invoke these serious First Amendment concerns about government control and government trying to sort of directly regulate speech. In our democracy, citizens have the ultimate suspension power, and whether it's this city commissioner or any other elected official, that's ultimately where they're going to be held accountable for what they say and do at the ballot box.
I want to move on and ask you about the pending sale, the efforts to sell the Duval County School Board headquarters. There was new reporting this week, again, from our colleagues at Jacksonville Today. Megan Malicote did some excellent deep dive reporting into other bids that were received. So we had heard about this $20 million bid. Fleet Landing wants to buy the old school board headquarters downtown that's on the river, turn it into a senior living facility. That was presented to the school board. None of the other offers were presented to the school board. And in fact, Megan's repeated requests for those other offers were denied, the school district citing a statute that did not apply as an exemption to the public records law. She ultimately got those records, and it showed that there were these other bids. First of all, I want to ask you straight up about the transparency element there. There is an expectation that government records, government functions are public, but it's sort of one thing to not tell the media, I suppose, about pending offers, to not tell the school board itself, which did not get this information, at least as of when the report was written in Jacksonville Today. What is an obligation to turn over that kind of information to them so they know who else is bidding, how much they've offered?
Well, I think it's crucial they have the school board members are fiduciaries, just like sort of members of any organization who have an obligation to make financial decisions on behalf of Duval County Public Schools. They set budgets, they make policy decisions, they have that fiduciary obligation to the school system. So I think anyone would argue that it's critical they have key information to be able to sort of make those decisions. First of all, kudos to Megan, who on a variety of educational issues, not just this one, has been very persistent and dogged in her reporting, trying to get information. I think it's important information so that the public is also aware of kind of the financial decisions the school board is making. This is a very significant financial decision for the school board. They are moving from a headquarters they've had for the last now almost 45 years, or potentially moving, depending on what the board decides, to a new facility, one that's kind of located in the south side. And these are significant transactions. Again, they're going to gain somewhere between $17 and $20 million for the sale of their current building, and then pay out somewhere in the neighborhood of about $14 million for this new building in the south side. These are significant amounts of taxpayer money. So I think it's incumbent always on public agencies to make sure not only that their fiduciaries, these school board members, have the key information they need to make those decisions, but the public, through the media and other sources, have this information as well, so that they can weigh in, just like citizens did at City Council the other night, with their opinion as to whether or not this is the right move for the school board or not. Because again, just like with the city of Jacksonville, the Duval County School Board, the top of the organizational chart is citizens who pay the taxes and ultimately hold elected officials accountable.
And it's worth noting that the school board was scheduled to vote on moving ahead with this sale as pitched to them before any of this information became available a couple weeks ago. They delayed that vote, and we'll see kind of where it goes from here now that they have this information.
Well, and kudos, and there's multiple school board members who are asking a lot of good questions about this transaction. I think 5 of the 7 have, have had questions about some of the real estate commissions the school board might be paying here, some of the other aspects of the deal. In other words, the deal would, if they took the $20 million offer, there would be $12.5 million the school board would receive now, and then another chunk of that would be several years later. And school board members have expressed, why are we doing that if there is an interest attached to it? So they're asking very good questions, doing exactly the kind of due diligence they should be doing. But that's always much easier when you have the information you
When
need
you have
to,
the
yeah,
information,
exactly.
right? Exactly. Well, I do want to ask as well about property taxes. The legislative session doesn't begin until January 2026, but the House is already meeting, discussing whether there should be a constitutional amendment put on the ballot for voters to decide whether they want to abolish property taxes in Florida, which sounds like a great idea, right? Everybody's like, yeah, I don't want to pay property taxes. The governor calls them I think he calls it a fee a rental fee or something. I'm sorry, I can't remember the language he has. But at any rate, they're looking at this constitutional amendment. Property taxes make up a big chunk of revenue for a lot of counties, not for all counties. Where do you see this going in terms of who might be impacted? We know that they're looking at possibly for people who have homestead properties, possibly for everybody that owns property.
Well, I think it's to be determined. The House appointed a special committee on property taxes, which is a huge committee. There are 120 members in the Florida House of Representatives. There are 37 of those members who are on this House Committee on Property Taxes. So, and they kind of started their work this week, kind of hearing from a variety of finance officials to really understand how ad valorem or property taxes work in this state, have begun hearing from local officials as well. It's not clear ultimately what the constitutional amendment would be. As you say, the kind of most aggressive form of that would be abolishing property taxes altogether. And by the way, this does have to be a constitutional amendment that would require 60% plus one of the voters to approve, because property taxes are enshrined in the Florida Constitution. The most aggressive version would be abolishing them altogether. Kind of the middle version would be abolishing them on homestead properties, properties that we've declared to be, actually where we live. And there would be smaller versions as well. The governor at one point floated an idea of having a $1,000 rebate for kind of property tax owners. So it's not clear where this is going to land. What is clear is that any change in property taxes has a very significant impact, particularly on local government. So city government, county government, school boards. Just for example, school boards around the state, school districts collectively get 47% of their funding from property taxes, 53% from the state. So you think of all the things that a school district funds, things like teachers' salaries, building maintenance, everything else that go into, buying instructional materials, everything that goes into running a school district. Essentially, half of that money comes from property taxes. The Florida Policy Institute's done some analysis on what some of this might mean in local communities. Let's just take the city of Jacksonville. We just passed a, roughly $2 billion budget. $1.2 billion of that $2 billion budget is funded through property taxes. So if you were to say eliminate property taxes altogether, you've now eliminated more than 50% of the city of Jacksonville budget, a budget that funds core services like police, fire, parks, public works, matters like that. If you just eliminated property taxes on homestead property, that would cut $400 million out of that nearly $2 billion budget. So that's a fifth of the budget right there, again, which primarily funds most of that budget is funding some of these core services that we're talking about.
Sure. I mean, half of it goes to public safety.
Exactly right. If you just go a little bit to the south in St. Johns County, you cut all property taxes out. That's nearly $400 million of their budget right there. And if you just cut out the homestead, that's just slightly over $200 million. And you see numbers like that throughout the state. This is something that local governments heavily rely on for those core services like police, fire, parks, public works. And so there's great consternation at the local level about what the state legislature might do. It's not clear where the legislature is going to take this. It is going to be a very contentious issue in the 2026 legislative session, which, because it is an even numbered year, starts in January this year and will end in March. So, really, for the first quarter of the year, expect that session to be dominated by talk of property taxes, and then the arena will shift to the ballot because whatever they pass, which has to be passed by a supermajority in the legislature, would then go on the November ballot. 60% plus one of the Florida electorate would have to decide to make whatever property tax change they recommend.
In just about a minute that we've got left, I want to talk about the gubernatorial race and how that's lining up, because we know that there's a couple of names that appear to be on the precipice of declaring, including possibly the lieutenant governor, Jay Collins, and also Orange County Mayor Jerry Demings from the Democratic side. So there are people that are suggesting that they might be tossing their hat into the ring. How does that, what is that whole race looking like so far?
Well, it's beginning to be a very crowded field. On the Republican side, you've already had declared Congressman Byron Donalds from Southwest Florida has been endorsed by President Trump. Former House Speaker Paul Renner, who is from this area, has also joined the governor's race. And now the Lieutenant Governor, Jay Collins, who's sort of seen as the candidate most likely to have Governor DeSantis' support, has also entered the race. So now an increasingly crowded Republican primary. On the Democratic side, you have former Congressman David Jolly, former Republican, now Democrat, who's running. And as you say, Orange County Mayor, formerly Orange County Sheriff Jerry Demings, has indicated he may jump into the race as well. You've seen other names like former Congressman Al Lawson and others. So it's beginning to feel like an open governor's race again. You know, in 2018, there were a number of candidates who ran after Rick Scott was termed out of office. Ron DeSantis ultimately won. But now 2026 is beginning to feel like 2018 again with a number of candidates. We'll have to see over the next couple of months how this develops and who the final candidates are. But we do know now it appears we're going to have robust primaries both on the Republican and the Democratic side.
Yeah, and probably rekindling the Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, rift there if we've got two very strong candidates endorsed by either man.
No doubt.
So, well, Chris Hand, it is always great to talk to you every month. Thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it.
And I'll look forward to seeing you in October.
All right. Up next, a homegrown bass virtuoso returns home for a performance at the Jessie. Welcome back. A local series focused on reanimating the city's jazz scene features a performance by Jacksonville-born and Chicago-based musician this Friday. Here to tell us more about his upcoming performance is Jeremiah Hunt, bassist and band leader. Jeremiah, good morning.
Good morning.
We're also joined by John Lumpkin, jazz artist and educator, and also the initiator and the man behind this Jazz Discovery series. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Ann.
Nice to see you again. So, Jeremiah, you started playing, I think, trumpet initially when you were just a little one, but you've gone on to a stringed instrument. Tell us a little bit about kind of where you found your musical passion when you were living in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I grew up listening to a lot of soul, funk, and R&B. Stevie Wonder, the P-Funk, Michael Jackson. A lot of that stuff. And I found my love in jazz, I would say, in middle school. I went to La Villa School of the Arts, and I still played the trumpet and the euphonium. I was pretty good at the euphonium. I made the all-state band.
Is that what you played with the band?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's what I played with the concert band.
The 2009 Disneyland All-American
Oh, no.
College Band?
That was actually, I played bass by then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Back in middle school, I was still playing trumpet and euphonium. But by the time I went to college, I was playing bass because I started playing the upright bass when I went to a FAMU summer band camp. I was playing the trumpet, but then when I went into a practice room, I saw an upright bass just standing there. And I had already played electric because I was playing with a band outside of my school. And so when I went to pick up the upright bass, I just fell in love with it instantly. And then that next year, I went back to school and I asked my orchestra teacher, can I be in the orchestra? And so that's when I started playing upright more.
Yeah. And so you have gone on to really expand on that, passion for percussive sound and rhythm. You play jazz with groups kind of really all over the place. You currently have a band called Kimmel, but you also a few years ago collaborated with Isaiah Collier, who had an album, I think, released in 2021. And you guys got a really rare 5-star review from Downbeat magazine, which is pretty extraordinary. I mean, that's reserved for the best of the best. What did it feel like to have that recognition?
Yeah, it was kind of abrupt and it felt really good. Isaiah is a dynamic saxophone player and he's kind of a genius. When the pandemic hit, he just kind of took off and he wanted to just started doing a bunch of stuff. It wasn't that much to do, so he's just like, let's make this thing happen. So we took a trip to New York and we recorded this album, Cosmic Transitions, at Rudy Van Gelder's studio in New Jersey, and that was the album that got the 5-star review. So it felt really good, and then we started touring right after that. So it was a fun period of my life.
John, what does it mean for the series to have someone of Jeremiah's caliber? I mean, obviously you bring in all kinds of jazz all-stars for this series, but it's nice to have somebody from home come back home to do a performance like this. So tell us about kind of persuading him to come and do the series and what people can expect to hear.
Oh man, in terms of persuading him to come here, it didn't really take too much, especially by us being good friends. From Jameson Ross to Janae Yates, Alfonso Horn, and now Jeremiah Hunt, they're all natives of Jacksonville. And it goes clear in line with what it is of what our mission is with the Jazz Discovery Series, which is bringing jazz back to Jacksonville. And that's what I'm doing here with Jeremiah Hunt. And I'm privileged that he actually said yes, to be able to work with the kids at the Jacksonville Arts and Music School as well as present a concert for our community.
You've said that you want to restore Jacksonville's reputation as the jazz heartbeat of the South and kind of the original Harlem.
Oh, yes.
So how's that going? I mean, how do you feel we are in terms of getting back that reputation where people know that this is a destination for great jazz?
I feel like it's just beginning. I feel like this definitely has the potential to be able to grow into something that is far beyond myself, something that our children can actually explore, to be able to experience diversity here within this city through the arts as a vehicle that I'm using jazz to be able to do, to give to people and a different perspective and just another taste, if you will, within their mouth of the many ingredients that jazz actually has. Democracy, being able to have a conversation with people that you don't even necessarily know, and present a platform to where people can be celebrated of all kinds in different walks of life.
Yeah, and Jeremiah, I was able to listen to some of your performances just on Instagram recordings that are out there and stuff, as well as the work that you did with Isaiah. But what is it that you're going to be performing at the Jessie here in town?
So the most recent group that I put together is a band called Kimmel. And Kim is an acronym for Keeping It Moving. And we are a jazz fusion group that blends soul, grooves, and improvisation. And we're happy to be performing with or having join us Mr. John Lumpkin and a couple of other Florida greats, Josh Bolis and Ryan Devlin on the saxophone. And so we're going to be just playing original music, and we're going to be playing a couple of arrangements of some great covers.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be a great show. It's Friday, this Friday, September 26th, at the Jessie. Doors at 6:30, and then the show is from 7 to 9:30. Jeremiah Hunt, John Lumpkin, great to talk to you today. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back in just a minute with the Sing Out Loud Festival, continuing with a vinyl showcase this weekend.
AEG presents Lake Street Drive. The five-piece band brings their blend of soul, folk, jazz, and pop to the St. Augustine Amphitheater on Saturday, September 27th at 6:30 p.m. Tickets and information available at theamp.com. Jenkins Quality Barbecue bids farewell September 30th after serving Jacksonville for 68 years. You've been more than customers, you've been family. Thank you for your love and loyalty. With deep appreciation, the Jenkins family.
I'm David McGowan, CEO of WJCT. From all of us here, a big thank you to all who donated during our recent pledge drive. Your generosity makes everything we do possible. The news you trust, the music you love, and the stories that inspire. We're here because of you. And a reminder that it's never too late to give at WJCT.org. Thank you.
NASA has its sights set on the moon, but it can't get there without commercial space companies.
You have this tension where so much of all of these important national programs are in the hands of one company, and a lot of people are concerned about that.
How private companies are influencing national policy on space exploration. That's on the next On Point.
Today at 11 on WJCT News 89.9.
President Trump calls press that's critical of him illegal. Secretary Hegseth adds new restrictions on journalists covering the Pentagon. And Trump and his FCC chair suggest taking broadcast licenses away from networks they say treat the president too negatively. The latest on the Trump administration's attacks on speech and press freedoms. Next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, the headliners from the Sing Out Loud Festival have come and gone, but the event continues through this weekend with a special vinyl event. Here to tell us about the day-long record fair is Dan Sostrom. He's the owner of Tone Vendor Records in St. Augustine and organizer of the St. Augustine Record Fair. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning. Welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. We're also joined by Diana Markovitz. She is Director of Public Relations and Partnerships for SJC Cultural Events, which puts on the Sing Out Loud Festival. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So you taking the breath yet?
No, not yet. No, you can't. We just keep saying can't hit a wall. Don't hit a wall.
know.
Just keep going. But it's been a fantastic month, and we're just so thrilled that the end of this month represents the Record Fair and the Songwriters Festival. It's been a big month for us.
So much diversity and variety in the lineup of the Sing Out Loud Festival. So many bands of all kinds, including, this last weekend, which was just jam-packed with, national headliners. So kudos for all that you've done.
You. Over 130 bands.
Dang.
130 acts.
Right. Yeah. And for people who weren't able to attend, I mean, it really was put on just impeccably, all kinds of great vendors, very well organized. So good job. I want to talk about the record fair, though. This is not the first year that you've been doing this. I mean, probably not annually, but since 2013.
Since 2013, yeah. We have done it. We used to do it twice a year. Now it is just once a year in partnership with Sing Out Loud each September.
Okay. And it is a fun event. It is a very chill experience. I mean, obviously there's records for sale, lots of vinyl, but there's all kinds of other things that are for sale. And it's at the AMP. So it's in this wide open outdoor space where people can shop, but also eat and drink because, the AMP concessions are open. What do you aim for with this festival in terms of vibe? And, what are you telling the vendors when they're there selling their stuff?
Yeah, you kind of hit it on the head. It's like there's a lot of these types of record show events that happen around, but ours is kind of a fan favorite of shoppers and vendors alike because it's such a laid back event. It's not in a conference room
Not
or
in a big
hotel
warehouse,
or something.
right?
So it is open air. We've got a DJ spinning records all day. We have live music. We always have a band. This year is Ghost Tropic, St. Augustine band is going to play. We've got the library bookmobile, St. John's Library will be there, and it's library card sign up month. So we're partnering with them for that. We've got the Bloodmobile, and like you said, there's drink specials with the concessions. There's 2 food trucks. So one of my favorite pictures that I've taken in years past, it's just there's no vendors in the picture. It's just people laying in the grass on blankets, chatting, laughing. So it's really just a day to hang out. That's kind of what we're aiming for. It's for all ages. And you don't have to have a record player, but if you need one, there will probably be one there for you. There's CDs, posters, memorabilia, toys. One of the vendors even sells his own pottery. So not a garage sale of sorts, but there's definitely more than just records.
A lot of variety. Yeah, and it doesn't have that sort of sterile atmosphere that you can find for some record fairs where just kind of the records is just for the shopping.
Right.
And in my memory, it is sort of people drinking a beer on the lawn.
For sure, yeah. And then, if you are that diehard record collector, there are thousands and thousands of records from, $1 a piece to the unobtainable for most budgets, but everything in between. A little something for everybody. For
And
sure.
you've got a record store in downtown St. Augustine.
We do, yeah. Tone Vendor is on King Street right across from Flagler College. We're one of 3 record stores there. Shout out to the other 2. There's also Music Matters Remixed and Rocking Chair Records, which will both be at the record fair, as well as vendors from Georgia. We got some coming from the Carolinas. So all over the Southeast, a bunch of vendors. Yeah.
And the vinyl has really made a resurgence. I mean, what do you attribute that to? In the last decade, it's not like in the last couple of years, but it really has come back.
It's even been a little longer than that, maybe 15 plus years. And I attribute it to a number of things. I think in that era and since, less now, so because it's making such a comeback, but people were kind of getting lost in the music. It was, everything was streaming. You put it on, you forget about it, and it's just like barely even there. You're not noticing it. Suddenly you go over to a friend's house and they're like, "What are you doing? What's this?" It's a tangible object. You're touching it, you're flipping it, and paying more attention to the music that way. So it really is there's that nostalgia feeling for people that used to have it. They got rid of the records years ago, and they
Wish
really
they
miss
hadn't
it.
now.
So, yeah. So we get the gamut from little kids to great grandparents who are now fans of vinyl for the first time or again.
Yeah, it is nice to have that experiential experience with a record. I mean, it does give you a whole different sense of who the band is, their identity, and you're also sort of forced to listen to the full thing. Diana, it's not like a song on on Spotify where you're just kind of hearing the next artist that sounds sort of similar.
Yes, this algorithm that just kind of feeds it to you. Yeah, you're hearing track after track as the band intended it to be.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, the event is Sunday, September 28th from 11 to 5 at the St. Augustine Amphitheater, and there's a link on our website for people who want more info. Thank you both. Diana,
Thank you.
Dan, thanks for being here today.
Thank
you so much.
All right, and thank you for listening. If you join us tomorrow, we're going to be talking about all the week's headlines with our media roundtable. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
Join me, Courtney Lewis, for a striking opening to the Jacksonville Symphony's Florida Blue Classical Series.